The story of Major League Soccer can be told through the stadiums. When the league began in 1996, the teams played primarily in borrowed NFL and college football stadiums, cavernous venues for a fledgling league. But as the league grew and found its own identity, the importance of having soccer-specific stadiums became clear, and a concerted effort was made by the league for teams to have their own stadiums. But every team's stadium situation has its very own history. And even today, some teams share a stadium with NFL teams. Each situation is unique. So let's take a look at the history of each team's stadium and maybe learn a bit about how that shaped the teams that we love today. Be sure to like and subscribe and get the bell on as we take this adventure into each club's home. Starting with the Columbus Crew, one of the founding teams of MLS, they began playing in a huge, historic college football mecca. Built by Ohio State University, Ohio Stadium opened in 1922. It has a capacity of over 100,000 people, making it one of the biggest stadiums in the world. The highest average attendance season for MLS was this past year, 2024, when the league averaged over 23,000 fans per match, which is great, but closer to NBA games than college football. Obviously, a 100,000 seat stadium is much too big for most MLS teams, if not most sports teams generally. The name Ohio Stadium, named for both the state and university, has been unchanged since it opened. Though the university did recently agree to a brand deal in 2022 to sell the naming rights to the field itself, branded as Safelite Field for Columbus's own Safelite Auto Glass, the windshield repair company. The main occupants, of course, are the Ohio State Buckeyes of NCAA college football, and they have called Ohio Stadium home since it opened in 1922. And when the Columbus Crew began, they started in Ohio Stadium in 1996. They knew, however, that it was important to quickly land their own home where they could begin building the future of their club. In 1999, that is exactly what the Columbus Crew did, becoming the first MLS team to build their own soccer-specific stadium. Now, when we talk about soccer-specific stadiums, we are typically talking about the US and Canada, in part because most stadiums in other parts of the world are already built for soccer by default. The main difference is building a stadium to fit the dimensions of a soccer field and typically having real grass as opposed to turf. Soccer-specific stadiums in North America typically account for a longer and wider field than American football or Canadian football, with the variability to range between 110 to 120 yards long and 70 to 80 yards wide. Also, being purpose-built means being able to have seating that comes right up to the edge of the playing surface, as opposed to having a track or a concrete runway that is typical in many college football and NFL stadiums. The Columbus Crew's new stadium, with a capacity ranging closer to 20,000 fans, was much more intimate and close to the action, more fitting for the size of crowds for North American soccer. The new stadium would be the Crew's home for over 2 decades. Originally, the stadium was named simply Columbus Crew Stadium. In 2015, the Crew reached a deal for the naming rights with the insurance company MAPFRE, and the stadium was named MAPFRE Stadium. In 2020, in anticipation of a new stadium for the club, the stadium name was changed to Historic Crew Stadium. The Columbus Crew played their final game in the stadium in 2021, and it has since been the home of Columbus Crew's MLS Next Pro team, Columbus Crew 2, who began playing in the stadium in 2022. Opening in 2021, the Crew's new stadium is Lower.com Field, built strategically in downtown Columbus's Arena District, which also contains the arena for the Columbus Blue Jackets, the ballpark for the Columbus Clippers baseball team, which is the AAA affiliate of the Cleveland Guardians, as well as other entertainment venues. The new home for the Crew is similar in size with a capacity right around 20,000, but with a prime location and modern amenities. The stadium was named Lower.com after the mortgage lender, described in a press release on the Crew's website as, quote, "Lower is a fintech company whose mission is to make the traditionally daunting task of buying or refinancing a home simple." The Crew played their first game there on July 3rd, 2021, and has remained their home ever since. DC United also began in a very large stadium, but unlike the Crew, DC United continued to play in the large stadium for the first 2 decades of their franchise. Their original home was RFK Stadium, which could seat over 50,000 for football and was reduced to 45,000 for baseball and 20,000 for soccer. Owned and operated by the District of Columbia, the stadium was originally built in 1961. At the time, it was named District of Columbia Stadium. In 1969, the stadium was renamed in honor of former U.S. Attorney General and U.S. Senator Robert F. Kennedy. The year prior, during his 1968 presidential campaign, Kennedy was assassinated. The main occupant of the stadium at the time was the Washington Redskins of the NFL, who were the first team to use the stadium as their home. In 1961, as a part of the agreement to move into the stadium on federal lands, Robert F. Kennedy's Justice Department worked to force the team to integrate, allowing black players to play for the team for the very first time, forever tying RFK's legacy to the stadium that would eventually bear his name. The Redskins would play in RFK Stadium until 1996, when DC United would take over as the main occupant until 2017. Other teams that called RFK Stadium home include the Washington Senators, before they moved to Texas and became the Rangers, and the Washington Nationals while they built Nationals Park after moving down from Montreal. After 2 decades in 2018, after years of exploring various different options in DC, Virginia, and Maryland, DC United finally opened their new home, Audi Field. Playing the first months of the season away while the stadium was completed, the first match took place on July 14th, 2018. The new stadium, also owned by the District of Columbia, but operated by DC United, was much better sized for its new occupants at a capacity of 20,000. The naming rights were sold to Audi, the German car maker, whose US headquarters are in a suburb of Washington, D.C. And that is where DC United still call home. In addition to DC United, since 2018, Audi Field has also been the home of the Washington Spirit of the NWSL, another soccer-specific stadium in the heart of a downtown community, bringing the joy of soccer to all. A very common setup for teams that are owned by an owner that already owns an NFL team is that the team begins playing in the same NFL stadium as the NFL team. In the case of the Revolution, that is Robert Kraft owning the New England Patriots. And although there has been an effort by the Revolution to build a soccer-specific stadium since at least 2006, no new stadium is currently on its way. The original stadium the team played in was Foxborough Stadium. Originally opened in 1971, the stadium was built to be the home of the New England Patriots. The original name of the stadium was Schaefer Stadium, named after the brewing company. In 1983, the naming deal expired, and the stadium was renamed in honor of the family that owned it at the time, the Sullivan family. And in 1990, the stadium was renamed to Foxborough Stadium, named for a shortened version of the town that the stadium is in, Foxborough, Massachusetts. In 1996, for the inaugural MLS season, Foxborough Stadium also became the home of the New England Revolution. In 2002, a new stadium opened up next door to Foxborough Stadium and became the new home for both the Patriots and the Revolution. The original naming rights of the stadium were sold to CMGI, a company that had exploded in value through the dot-com boom of the 1990s. Unfortunately, they were also a company hugely affected by the dot-com bust. The change in financial landscape as the new stadium was set to open presented the opportunity to Boston-based Gillette, the shaving company, to step in and buy the naming rights of the new stadium, giving us Gillette Stadium. Those naming rights were then extended in 2010 all the way until 2031. In addition to being the home of the Patriots and the Revolution, when it was announced that the Revolution would build a reserve team to begin playing in 2020, Gillette Stadium also became their home. The Revolution 2 played in Gillette first in the USL League 1, then they joined MLS Next Pro, MLS's affiliate league where most reserve teams play. Giants Stadium already had a history of hosting soccer by the time the New York Red Bull, then the Metro Stars, joined MLS in 1996. Built for the New York Giants of the NFL by the state of New Jersey, the stadium opened in 1976 and became the home of the Giants. Giants Stadium is named for the stadium's primary occupant. However, the Giants wouldn't be the sole occupant for long. The second year the stadium was open, it also became the home of the New York Cosmos of the original NASL. That would unfortunately only last until 1984 as the NASL began to fold. But at the same time, the New York Jets lease was ending at Shea Stadium, and they reached an agreement to also use Giants Stadium as their home. The 1994 World Cup saw yet more soccer games happening in Giants Stadium, so it was a natural fit when the Metro Stars began in Major League Soccer in 1996. 2009 was the final year all three, the Giants, Jets, and now Red Bulls, would occupy Giants Stadium. The NFL teams moved to MetLife Stadium, and the New York Red Bulls moved to their soccer-specific stadium, Red Bull Arena. Named after the ownership of the team, Red Bull, the Austrian energy drink and sports ownership group, this is actually one of 3 Red Bull arenas, all operated by Red Bull for their soccer teams. RB Leipzig's stadium is also called Red Bull Arena, and so is Red Bull Salzburg Stadium. As a soccer-specific stadium, Red Bull Arena became the perfect fit for additional soccer teams looking for a home. It has been the home off and on of Red Bulls 2, the team's reserve squad now playing in MLS Next Pro. And in 2020, the stadium became the home of the NWSL side, New Jersey New York Gotham FC. Red Bull Arena also occasionally hosts games for New York City FC when there are scheduling conflicts with playing in Yankee Stadium, their home since 2015. But more on that when we get to them. And before we move on, we've got some breaking news. As I was editing this, I just found out that they actually sold the naming rights, and now Red Bull Arena is called Sports Illustrated Stadium. The naming rights are sold to a company that licenses the name Sports Illustrated from the magazine, and now they are going to be the official naming sponsor, and starting in 2026, the official ticketing agency of Red Bull in the MLS. So, quick update, didn't have it in the original script, but wanted to sneak it in here right at the end. Originally built in 1948 as a baseball stadium for the Denver Bears baseball team of the Western League, in 1960 the Denver Broncos of the AFL became the primary occupant of what was then still called Bears Stadium. After the AFL-NFL merger was announced in 1966, the capacity was expanded to 50,000 seats and the renamed stadium was renamed to Mile High Stadium. Mile High Stadium was chosen as a name because of Denver's nickname, the Mile High City. So named because Denver's official elevation is exactly 1 mile, or 5,280 feet above sea level. The place that is measured from is actually on the steps of the Denver Capitol building, where the 15th step is engraved with the words 1 mile above sea level. Playing sports at a mile high is a bit of a competitive advantage for the city of Denver, as I've discussed in previous videos. But it turns out in 1969 it was calculated that the 18th step was actually the correct step to measure from, and a second marker was made and placed on the 18th step. But then in 2003, a modern measurement identified the 13th step, and another marker was added there, giving us 3 markers on the steps of the Capitol to indicate the 1 mile mark and the official elevation of Denver. As I mentioned before, in addition to the Denver Bears, which played at the stadium from 1948 up until 1992 as a minor league team, the Denver Broncos had used Mile High as their home since 1960. The Colorado Rockies then had a brief stint at the stadium in 1993 and 94, and then in 1996, the Colorado Rapids began playing in Mile High Stadium. The Broncos then built a new home that opened in 2001. Named Invesco Field at Mile High, Invesco is a large investment company that originally purchased the naming rights. It would later be renamed to Sports Authority Field for the retail chain, Broncos Stadium, and then finally Empower Field, which is still named today. In 2002, the Colorado Rapids moved into Invesco Field at Mile High, while making plans for a permanent move of their own. 2007, the Colorado Rapids opened their new home. The naming rights were sold to Dick's Sporting Goods on a 20-year deal, and Dick's Sporting Goods Park finally gave the Colorado Rapids their very own soccer-specific stadium to call home. The very first home for FC Dallas, all the way back when they were the Dallas Burn, was the Cotton Bowl. Much like the Columbus Crew playing in Ohio Stadium from earlier, the Cotton Bowl, although an iconic and historic American stadium, it is much too large for a North American soccer team, seating well over 90,000. Built in 1930, the original name was Fair Park Stadium, because it was built on the site of the Texas State Fair, which is known as Fair Park. Starting in 1937, the stadium became the site of the Cotton Bowl, a college football game named after the stadium, which itself was renamed to Cotton Bowl Stadium in honor of the cotton industry. Historically, the cotton industry has been very important to both Texas and Dallas. In 2010, the bowl game itself would be moved to the Dallas Cowboys AT&T Stadium, now no longer in its namesake stadium. But before the Cotton Bowl became the home of the then Dallas Burn, it was the longtime home of the SMU Mustangs of college football. The original Dallas Texans of the NFL played a single season there in 1952 before folding, and the AFL Dallas Texans would play there in 1960 before moving to Kansas City and becoming the Kansas City Chiefs. When the Dallas Cowboys first started in the NFL, which is actually a quite fascinating story that I've talked about before on my channel. You can click on the card on screen or find a link in the description below, but check it out, it's actually one of my favorite videos. But when the Dallas Cowboys began in the NFL, they too began playing in the Cotton Bowl. But as mentioned before, the Burn began playing in the Cotton Bowl in 1996. In 2003, in an attempt to save money, the team played a single season at a high school. I mean, it is Texas, so a high school stadium is actually quite nice, but still, it was not well received by fans, and with a soccer-specific stadium already on its way, the team moved back to the Cotton Bowl for 2 more seasons before opening their new stadium. The high school stadium for Carroll Senior High School actually has a pretty cool name after their sports team, Dragons Stadium, and it is still the current home of the Southlake Carroll Dragons. Playing one more full season in the Cotton Bowl, in 2005 mid-season, the now FC Dallas moved into their new soccer-specific stadium, making them the 3rd team in the league with their own stadium. The naming rights were sold and the stadium was originally Pizza Hut Park, which I love Pizza Hut as much as the next guy, but it feels a little bit odd for the name of a stadium. Is that just me? After the Pizza Hut rights expired, the stadium was renamed to FC Dallas Stadium. And then in 2013, the stadium was renamed to Toyota Stadium after a naming deal was struck that is still held today. At the time of their founding, the KC Wiz were owned by a singular sports figure, Lamar Hunt, founder of the AFL, the American Football League. His family still owns the Chiefs today. Though perhaps while most Americans will recognize Lamar Hunt for his importance to football, he is also maybe the most important individual in North American soccer. Kind of wild. He was a founder of the original NASL, and he was also an original founder of MLS. He was actually one of the largest proponents of soccer-specific stadiums to begin with. Allow me an aside, cause Hunt is a true sports legend, with trophies named after him in 2 different sports. The Lamar Hunt Trophy for the champion of the AFC in the NFL, and the Lamar Hunt US Open Cup, the oldest soccer competition in the United States. And here's where we can tie a nice bow on some of these early teams. At the inception of the league, Hunt originally owned both the Columbus Crew and the KC Wiz. He financed the first soccer-specific stadium in MLS, historic Crew Stadium, and he also purchased FC Dallas and built that stadium, and the team is still owned by the Hunt family today. The story is much the same when it comes to Sporting Kansas City, and it is largely because of him that MLS has really prioritized these soccer-specific stadiums. When the stadium was being built, Lamar Hunt himself was quoted by the Kansas City Star as saying, "We have named our stadium Arrowhead. We feel that Arrowhead is a most symbolic name for the home of the Chiefs." Arrowhead is obviously a play on Native American theming of the Kansas City Chiefs. In 2021, the stadium was renamed for the first time, well, technically the field's naming rights, giving us a full name of GEHA Field at Arrowhead Stadium. GEHA is a nonprofit that manages the federal benefits for governmental employees, standing for Government Employees Health Association. And Arrowhead remains the Chiefs' home stadium to this day. The Kansas City Wizards naturally began playing in Arrowhead because of the mutual ownership of Lamar Hunt, and they remained there until 2006, when the club was sold shortly before Lamar Hunt's passing. The new ownership group moved the team's home field to, at the time, what was called Community America Ballpark, a baseball stadium with the naming rights sold to a local credit union named Community America. After the naming rights expired in 2017, the stadium was named T-Bones Stadium after the independent baseball team, the T-Bones, which called it home. The T-Bones then became the Kansas City Monarchs in 2021 in honor of the historic Negro League team of the same name. They worked in conjunction with the Negro League Baseball Museum, which is also located in Kansas City, on the Missouri side. Upon the historic rebranding and to honor the history, the stadium was renamed to Legends Field. The nearby commercial district is also named Legends to honor local Kansas City figures. Legends Field has been the home of the Monarchs since 2003, and the Kansas City Wizards in the years just before they rebranded to Sporting Kansas City and moved into their new stadium. The NWSL Kansas City Current also played a season here in 2021. Nearby Legends Field is also 2 other sports facilities, the Kansas Speedway Racetrack and the current home of Sporting Kansas City Children's Mercy Park. Built in 2011, the new home of Sporting Kansas City would be called Livestrong Sporting Park. Livestrong is the foundation that was founded by Lance Armstrong to provide support for people battling cancer. Armstrong is a former American cyclist and Tour de France winner, and he is also a cancer survivor. Following a doping scandal that embattled both Livestrong and Armstrong, Sporting Kansas City and Livestrong agreed to terminate the naming agreement, and the stadium was renamed Sporting Park. In 2015, Sporting reached a deal with Children's Mercy to rename the stadium, giving us Children's Mercy Park. Children's Mercy is a private, non-profit children's hospital in Kansas City. In addition to being Sporting Kansas City's home since 2011, Children's Mercy Park was the home stadium for the Kansas City Current for 2022 and 2023 until they opened their brand new stadium in 2024. The LA Galaxy are yet another MLS team beginning in a cavernous football stadium, this one the historic Rose Bowl. Built in 1923, the stadium was named the Rose Bowl. The name comes from the Yale Bowl and the Tournament of Roses to give us the Rose Bowl. The design was based on the Yale Bowl, where the University of Yale played their home games. The bowl shape was unique at the time, and the Rose Bowl was built to hold the college football bowl game immediately following the Tournament of Roses parade in Pasadena, California. The Tournament of Roses parade has happened since 1890, and when the Rose Bowl opened in 1923, it became the site of its namesake game. In addition to the Rose Bowl, multiple college football teams have called the Rose Bowl home. The Caltech Beavers, the Loyola Lions, CSULA Diablos, and of course the UCLA Bruins, who currently play there. Additionally, the Rose Bowl was the home of the LA Galaxy when they first began in 1996. The LA Galaxy moved into their stadium in 2003, the second soccer-specific stadium for any MLS team. Originally, it was called the Home Depot Center, naming rights sold to the home improvement store chain. In 2013, a new naming rights deal was struck with StubHub, the online ticketing service. And in 2019, the stadium was renamed to Dignity Health Sports Park, named after Dignity Health, a nonprofit hospital chain. The LA Galaxy are, of course, the main occupants of the stadium, but they were joined by many other sports teams. Some of the major ones include the now defunct MLS team Chivas USA from 2005 to 2014, and you can learn more about their history in my MLS names video. Another featured occupant was the Los Angeles Chargers after they had moved to LA from San Diego. They called the stadium home from 2017 to 2019 until SoFi Stadium was built. And continuing with the San Diego to LA pipeline, for 2 seasons in 2020 and 2021, the San Diego Aztecs used the stadium for home games until their new stadium was built, which you will be hearing a lot more about later. The San Jose Earthquake have a storied history dating back to their first home at Spartan Stadium in 1974. Oh wait, that's the NASL team. Again, the history of this team runs quite deep in San Jose. You see, Spartan Stadium was built in 1933, becoming home of the San Jose State Spartans of the NCAA. It was the home of the NASL Earthquakes in the 70s and 80s, and when MLS launched with a team in San Jose, the then Clash began playing in the very same Spartan Stadium in 1996. In 2016, the stadium naming rights were sold to Citizens Equity First Credit Union, and the stadium was named CEFCU Stadium. A little bit of a mouthful, but it was renamed long after the Earthquakes had already moved into a different stadium. That stadium was Buckshaw Stadium. The soccer stadium is the home of the Santa Clara University soccer team and is named after a former Santa Clara football coach who also went on to coach the 49ers. The Earthquakes moved into this stadium in 2008 while they worked on long-term plans for their own soccer-specific stadium. The very same year that they departed for their own stadium, Buckshaw Stadium was renamed Stevens Stadium, keeping the field name after Buck Shaw and the stadium named after the family that donated for its renovation. The Earthquakes' new stadium opened in 2015 and was originally named Avaya Stadium, named after Avaya, a tech company. When the naming rights deal expired, the stadium was simply named Earthquakes Stadium, until 2021 when a new deal was reached with the tech company PayPal. San Jose finally had their home stadium, and they shared it briefly with their MLS Next Pro team, the Town FC, and they currently share it with the NWSL side Bay FC. The Chicago Fire is another team continuing the trend of using cavernous NFL and college football stadiums. Originally Grant Park Stadium, named after the nearby park, Soldier Field is a municipal stadium owned by Chicago's Park District, and was the Chicago Fire's first home when they became an MLS expansion team. Soldier Field was renamed in 1925 in dedication to U.S. soldiers of World War I. The historic stadium is the oldest stadium in the NFL, where it has been the home of the Chicago Bears since 1971. The stadium was one of the main venues of the 1994 FIFA World Cup, and it has a large list of occupants over its long and storied history. Those would include names like the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and the Chicago Cardinals of the NFL, and of course, the Chicago Fire. During the 2002 and 2003 seasons, the Chicago Fire moved into what was then Cardinals Stadium of North Central College, and they remained there while Soldier Field was renovated and modernized. The stadium was renamed in 2003 after two North Central College alumni, Al Benedetti and Dick Worley. The two of them, members of the Board of Trustees, were in part responsible for the fundraising campaign to build the stadium, and it now bore their name, Benedetti and Worley Stadium. After a brief return to Soldier Stadium, in 2006 the Fire opened a brand new stadium, owned by the village of Bridgeview just outside of downtown Chicago. This new stadium was built as a soccer-specific venue specifically for the Fire. Originally called Toyota Stadium for the car manufacturer, at the end of the 2018 season it was renamed to SeatGeek Stadium for the online ticketing company. And while it was originally built with the Fire in mind, eventually a new owner negotiated out of the lease and moved the team back into Soldier Field, the stadium they've continued to call home now since 2020. But SeatGeek Stadium wasn't empty, because the now primary occupant of SeatGeek Stadium is the Chicago Red Stars of the NWSL, and it is also where the Chicago Fire FC2 MLS Next Pro team also calls home. Searching for a home stadium for their inaugural season, Real Salt Lake first began playing at Rice-Eccles Stadium at the University of Utah. The new stadium replaced the old Rice Stadium in preparation for the 2002 Winter Olympics. The stadium is named after Robert L. Rice, the namesake and fundraiser of the original stadium, and Spencer Eccles, an alumnus of Utah and fundraiser for the new stadium. This stadium is the main home of the Utah Utes in the NCAA, and it was Real Salt Lake's home from 2005 to 2008. During that time, Real Salt Lake worked on acquiring their own stadium. After many difficult negotiations with the county, a deal was struck and passed by the county council in 2006. The stadium opened in 2008 and was named Rio Tinto Stadium, the naming rights being sold to a mining company. In 2022, the naming rights were sold again, and this time to America First Credit Union, and the stadium was renamed to America First Field. Ever since it opened, it has been the home of Real Salt Lake, and it is the home of the former and current iterations of the Utah Royals of the NWSL. After the San Jose Earthquakes were put on hiatus and the team relocated to Houston, becoming the Houston Dynamo, they found their very first home at Robertson Stadium in Houston. Originally called Public School Stadium, the stadium was opened in 1942 by the Houston Independent School District. At the time, the University of Houston was under the purview of HISD, The stadium was built as a joint project between the school district and the WPA, part of the Roosevelt administration's New Deal. In 1958, the stadium was renamed Jepson Stadium after a school board member who was partly responsible for the original construction. In 1970, Corbin J. Robertson, the University of Houston Athletics Committee chairman, raised funds to renovate the stadium, and the university purchased it from the school district. The stadium was then renamed in his honor in 1980. The Houston Dynamo then began playing there in 2006 and called it home until a permanent soccer-specific stadium could be built in 2012. After the Dynamo moved out, the stadium was demolished in 2012 and replaced by the university with a new stadium. The main occupant of the stadium was the Houston Cougars of the NCAA, but they were also joined there by the Texas Southern Tigers, as well as the Houston Oilers when they were in the AFL. The Houston Dynamo's new home was opened in 2012, and it is a municipal sports stadium owned by the Harris County Houston Sports Authority. The stadium was partly funded by public funds and funds from the Dynamo. The original naming rights were sold to BBVA USA, the American subsidiary of the Spanish bank BBVA. Previously named Compass Bancshares, the company was named BBVA Compass after it was acquired by BBVA. I know that's a lot of spelling, stick with me because there's a ton more letters coming your way. In 2019, when the company was renamed BBVA USA, the stadium was renamed BBVA Stadium. Then in 2021, BBVA was acquired by PNC, and the stadium was renamed PNC Stadium for the duration of the naming rights agreement. At the beginning of 2023, a new naming rights deal was struck with Shell, the British energy company, renaming the stadium to Shell Energy Stadium. The Houston Dynamo have been the main occupants of the stadium since 2012, but they have shared the stadium from the beginning with the Texas Southern Tigers, who moved into the stadium the same year. Also, while the new stadium was being built for the Houston Cougars, they played a single season in this new stadium as well. The Houston Dash of the NWSL have also called Shell Stadium their home since their inception in 2014. BMO Field opened just in time for the opening of the 2007 inaugural season of Toronto FC. It's a municipal soccer-specific stadium also meant to host international games such as World Cups or the Canadian national team. The naming rights are sold to the Bank of Montreal, or BMO, one of Canada's largest banks. And BMO Field has been Toronto FC's only home for their entire existence. In addition to Toronto FC, BMO Field has been the home of the CFL's Toronto Argonauts since 2016, which, fun fact, they are one of the oldest sports teams in the world. I do not know much about Canadian football. Maybe one day I'll make a video learning something about that. Comment below if Canadian football is your thing, because I genuinely don't know how big of an audience that is. Are you interested in a CFL video? Let me know. The Seattle Sounders already had a home field when they joined the MLS in 2009, sharing the Seahawks Stadium Quest Field. Originally named Seahawks Stadium, in 2004 the naming rights were sold to Quest, a telecommunications company in the western United States. The company was then acquired by CenturyLink in 2011, and the stadium was renamed to CenturyLink Field. Then in 2020, CenturyLink, the parent company, was renamed to Lumen, with the name CenturyLink remaining as a consumer-facing service provider. Built in 2002 primarily for the Seattle Seahawks, they were soon joined by the then USL Seattle Sounders, who would go on to transfer into MLS as an expansion team in 2009. This is the era of Seattle Sounders with the single best sports logo ever, which I talked about in my video on MLS logos. The Washington Huskies briefly played their games in CenturyLink Field in 2011 and 2012, and Lumen Field is the current home of Seattle Reign FC of the NWSL as well. But like I mentioned, the Seattle Sounders have a long history predating the MLS days and their days playing in NFL stadiums. In case you're wondering, before joining the Seahawks in their new stadium, the primary home of the Seattle Sounders during their pre-MLS days is a stadium named Memorial Stadium, built in 1947 and named after a memorial for casualties from Seattle public schools killed during World War II. The stadium is owned by the Seattle School District and is one of its primary football venues. In addition to being home of the school district and the home of the pre-MLS Sounders, this was also the home of the first 2 seasons of the original NASL Seattle Sounders. And before joining the now Sounders in the Seahawks Stadium, the Seattle Reign also called Memorial Stadium home from 2014 to 2018. Construction delays prevented Philadelphia Union from playing their first games in their new stadium. So when they joined the league in 2010, their first home games were played at Lincoln Financial Field. Built in 2003 to be the home of the Philadelphia Eagles, the naming rights were sold as the stadium was being built to Lincoln Financial Group, an asset management company headquartered in Radnor, Pennsylvania, a mainline suburb of Philadelphia. In addition to the Eagles, since being built, the stadium has served as the home field for the Temple Owls college football team. And of course, at the beginning of the 2010 MLS season, the stadium briefly served as the home of the Philadelphia Union. Once completed, however, the Union moved 15 miles down the Delaware River into their new home for their first home game in their new stadium in June of 2010. The original name of the stadium was PPL Park, sold to the Allentown-based Energy Company. PPL is short for Pennsylvania Power and Light. And when parts of the PPL Corporation were spun off as Talon Energy, the naming rights for the stadium were changed to match this new venture as Talon Energy Stadium. And in 2020, a new deal was struck for the naming rights with Subaru, the Japanese automaker, and the stadium was renamed Subaru Park. The home of the Philadelphia Union since it was built, the stadium also currently serves as the home for the MLS Next Pro team, Philadelphia Union 2. Perhaps the most historic soccer stadium in the United States, the Portland Timbers have called Providence Park home in every iteration of the team. We're talking NASL, WSA, APSL, A-League, USL, and of course, MLS. Different starts and stops to the team spanning decades, but the constant has always been Providence Park. Originally constructed by Multnomah Athletic Club, the original name Multnomah Field borrows from its founder in name. Multnomah is the county that Portland is in, and the name of a nearby creek and waterfall. A great visit if you happen to be in Portland. The athletic club is still around today, bordering the south end of the stadium here, billing itself as the largest private athletic and social club in the United States, with a membership that is 21,000 plus strong. The athletic club itself dates back to 1891. In 1926, the athletic club funded the construction of the stadium, becoming Multnomah Stadium. And in 1966, the stadium was sold to the city of Portland and renamed Civic Stadium. In 2001, the naming rights were sold for the very first time to the utility company Portland General Electric, giving us PGE Park. In 2011, as the Timbers were joining MLS, the naming rights were sold once again, this time to Geldwin, a building products company, giving us Geldwin Field. Finally, in 2014, the stadium was renamed to Providence Park after the rights were sold again, this time to the healthcare company Providence Health and Services. And like I said from the start, this has been the Timbers' home stadium since the beginning. It was there when they joined MLS in 2011. And when the current iteration was founded in the A-League in 2001. When they tried to revive the Timbers in the WSA in 1985, and was the original home when the Timbers first joined the NASL in 1975. Also, they are also joined by the Portland Thorns of the NWSL, who began playing in 2013 with Providence Park as their home. Additionally, many iterations of the Portland Beavers of the Pacific Coast League played in Providence Park over the seasons. And at various times, the stadium hosted partial or full seasons of NCAA football games for Oregon, Oregon State, and Portland State dating back to the 1890s. Built for the 1986 World's Fair Expo 86, BC Place is the home stadium for the Vancouver Whitecaps. BC Place was built by the province of British Columbia, hence the BC. And the name BC Place fits in with a common naming convention often seen in Canada with places such as Canada Place, the convention center about a mile away, which was redeveloped just in time for the same 1986 World's Fair. Because it is publicly owned, the naming rights have never been sold, though there has always been speculation that a naming rights deal could be just on the horizon. BC Place is the home of the BC Lions of the Canadian Football League, in addition to being the home of the Vancouver Whitecaps, of course. The previous NASL Vancouver Whitecaps also called BC Place home before that original NASL team folded. Saputo Stadium, or Stadie Saputo, was built in 2008 and has been the permanent home of CF Montreal since before they joined MLS in 2012. When they opened the stadium, the team was still the Montreal Impact, playing in the USL and NASL. The stadium is named after the owners of CF Montreal, the Saputo family. But before the team's home was built, as they were playing in the APSL and then the A-League, they played their games at Complexe Sportif Claude Robière, named after the first urban planning department director for the city of Montreal. This sporting complex was built for the 1976 Summer Olympics, hosted in Montreal, and it continues to be used as a municipal sports facility and Olympic training facility. The Impact played on the soccer field, and the field continues to be used by various other semi-professional sports teams, such as lower-tier soccer and even Ultimate Frisbee. Yankee Stadium was built in 2009 to replace their old stadium, a block away, also named Yankee Stadium. The stadium named after one of sports' most iconic teams, the New York Yankees. In 2013, when New York City FC was announced to be joining MLS for the 2015 season, it was also announced that the Yankee ownership group would also be partial owners. This made for a natural fit to use Yankee Stadium as their home stadium when they joined the league in 2015. And while New York City FC have played in Yankee Stadium ever since, it was just announced this past November that Etihad Park would be built as a new permanent home. The naming rights will belong to Etihad Airways, and the United Arab Emirates-based airline is also the jersey sponsor for the team. Once built, Etihad Park will be home for NYCFC for years to come, with 2027 as the expected season they will move in. Now, you might be wondering to yourself, what happens when Yankee Stadium has a Yankees game? Well, at various other times, NYCFC has to play at other fields around New York, including the New York Red Bulls Stadium. After the Austin Aztecs were dissolved and moved to Orlando, Orlando City SC was born. Their first home stadium was Camping World Stadium for their inaugural season in 2011. The massive stadium was originally built in 1936 and named Orlando Stadium, named for the city who built it and continues to this day to own and operate it. Becoming the site of the Tangerine Bowl in college football, the name was changed to match in 1947. After the Tangerine Bowl was renamed to the Citrus Bowl, again the name was changed to match in 1976. However, a botched expansion required massive renovations, and the name returned to Orlando Stadium in 1977. In 1983, the Florida Department of Citrus became the title sponsor, renaming the stadium to the Florida Citrus Bowl. In 2014, the stadium was renamed again to the Orlando Citrus Bowl. And in 2016, a new naming rights deal was struck, selling the naming rights to Camping World, a company specializing in selling camping equipment, especially recreational vehicles, or RVs. In 1979, the stadium became the home of the UCF Knights of College Football, who would call the stadium home for almost 3 decades. Orlando City then moved in when they began in 2011. After a season in 2014, while improvements were made to the stadium, the team played elsewhere before returning to what was then the Orlando Citrus Bowl for their inaugural MLS season in 2015. Joining them a year later was their NWSL counterpart, the Orlando Pride. The brief stopover that we mentioned in 2014 was at the ESPN Wide World of Sports complex. This might sound familiar from the MLS's Back tournament or the NBA bubble. Originally named Disney's Wide World of Sports complex when it opened in 1997, it is named after ABC's Wide World of Sports. Wide World of Sports was a television show ran by ABC from the 1960s until the 1990s. And after Disney purchased ABC in 1996, it was a natural fit for the name for the sports facility. In 2010, the complex was renamed for another Disney entity, ESPN, their sports television network. The complex hosts all kinds of sports from amateur to college and even professional. Opening in 2017, the new home of Orlando City SC was originally named Orlando City Stadium. This new soccer-specific stadium was purpose-built for the club and originally named for the club itself. In 2019, the naming rights were sold to Exploria Resorts, a timeshare company. And in 2024, the rights were then purchased by Inter & Co., a Brazilian fintech company. And Inter & Co. Stadium continues to be the home of both Orlando City SC and the Orlando Pride. Joining Major League Soccer in 2017, Atlanta United was delayed in moving into their home stadium and ended up playing a partial season in Georgia Tech's Bobby Dodd Stadium. Predating the stadium itself, football had been played at this location since 1905. In 1913, the first stands were erected, the barest of the beginnings of a stadium. And Grant Field was originally named after Hugh Inman Grant, the original benefactor of the stadium. In 1988, the stadium was renamed in honor of Bobby Dodd, a beloved Georgia Tech coach. He had spent more than 4 decades as the football coach, baseball coach, and athletic director over his career at Georgia Tech. Dodd had passed away during the summer before the start of the school year in 1988. In 2023, the naming rights of the field were sold to Hyundai, the South Korean automaker, giving us the stadium's current full name, Bobby Dodd Stadium at Hyundai Field. One of the oldest stadiums in all of college football, though admittedly a ship of Theseus like most old stadiums, the stadium was the perfect spot for a temporary home for Atlanta United, situated less than a 2-mile drive to their new home, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. The naming rights were sold for the stadium before it opened, and in its short history, the stadium's name has always been Mercedes-Benz Stadium, named for the German automaker. It is a replacement for the Georgia Dome, the previous home of the Atlanta Falcons, and was built in an adjacent location, making moving from one to the other easier. And like its predecessor, it is owned by the state of Georgia, while being operated by the ownership of the Atlanta Falcons. Since the Atlanta Falcons ownership group also owns Atlanta United FC, it was always planned to share a home stadium once it opened in 2017. In addition to NFL and MLS games, the stadium also hosts a number of NCAA football games every season, including the occasional national championship. The stadium is also one of the stadiums hosting games for the 2026 World Cup. Built in 2009 for the University of Minnesota, the football stadium that would be the initial home for Minnesota United FC was originally named TCF Bank Stadium. TCF stands for Twin Cities Federal, the name of the bank that owned the naming rights. In 2021, TCF was acquired by Huntington Bank Shares, a bank out of Ohio. When TCF was acquired, the name on the stadium was changed to match the new ownership, giving us Huntington Bank Stadium. And the Golden Gophers have called the stadium home since its completion in 2009. It also served as the home field for the Minnesota Vikings after the closing of the Metrodome while US Bank Stadium was being completed. And of course, it served as the home field for Minnesota United FC when they joined MLS and awaited the completion of the construction on their very own soccer-specific stadium, Allianz Field. Naming rights for the new stadium were already sold before it opened to the German life insurance company Allianz Life, giving us the name Allianz Field. And in addition to being home of Minnesota United, since it opened in 2019, Allianz Field is also the home of Minnesota United FC2, their MLS Next Pro team. The new home of LAFC was completed in 2018, and it was built on the site of the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena. That site was the former home of the USC Trojans basketball team, the Los Angeles Lakers when they first moved to LA, the Clippers also played there, and the Kings played there as well. The original naming rights were sold to Bank of California, a regional bank headquartered in Los Angeles, giving us Bank of California Stadium. In 2020, it was announced that the naming agreement would be terminated early and a new partner would be found. In 2023, the team made a deal for the stadium rights to be sold to the Bank of Montreal, shortly after BMO's acquisition of Bank of the West, another California-based bank. BMO Stadium has been the home for Los Angeles FC since their inaugural season in 2018, and they were joined by Angel City FC in 2022 when they joined the NWSL and began playing home matches in BMO Stadium. Like many teams on this list, when FC Cincinnati first formed, they played their home games at a college football stadium. The home stadium for the Cincinnati Bearcats, Nippert Stadium, was originally named Carson Field after the original organizer of the first UC football team, Arch Carson. In 1923, James Gamble Nippert, grandson of his namesake James Gamble of Procter & Gamble, was injured during a football game, sustaining a gash on his leg. Unfortunately, the injury got infected and James Nippert passed away on Christmas Day from sepsis. His grandfather donated $250,000 in 1920s money in memory of his grandson to fund the construction and the completion of the stadium. With a story like that, the University of Cincinnati is understandably reluctant to sell the naming rights to their home stadium. And Carson Field at Nippert Stadium has been the home of the Bearcats since 1901. The Cincinnati Bengals briefly played at Nippert Stadium in 1968 and 1969 when they were still in the AFL, pre-merger with the NFL. And as mentioned before, when FC Cincinnati were founded as a team in the United Soccer League, or the USL, Nippert Stadium was their home, and they continued to play there as they joined Major League Soccer in 2019. As a part of the agreement to join MLS, FC Cincinnati ownership agreed to pursue a soccer-specific stadium. That pursuit became a reality when TQL Stadium opened in 2021. The soccer-specific stadium was built to be the new home of FC Cincinnati. The naming rights were sold to Total Quality Logistics, a logistics company founded originally in Cincinnati, giving the stadium the name TQL Stadium. The plan for Inter Miami CF and their home stadium was rolled out in multiple parts. Built on the site of a previous stadium named Lockhart Stadium, this new facility was built to be the temporary home field of Inter Miami CF, as well as the long-term training facilities and the stadium for their youth and developmental league teams. And since the stadium was built, it has been the home for all Inter Miami teams since it opened. Joining the league for the 2020 season, Inter Miami's first and current home stadium was originally named after the club, Inter Miami CF Stadium. In 2021, a deal was struck for the naming rights with AutoNation, and the stadium was originally renamed to Drive Pink Stadium, spelt DRVPNK, and it was a tie-in to AutoNation's campaign for breast cancer awareness. Drive and pink are abbreviated like what you would see on a license plate. At the beginning of the 2024 season, a new deal was struck with JP Morgan Chase, the largest bank conglomerate in the world, and the name of the stadium was changed to Chase Stadium. But the future holds many things for Inter Miami. Located in Miami proper, the future home of Inter Miami is slated to open next season in 2026 and will be named Miami Freedom Park. The stadium will be an anchor to a downtown district featuring a mixed use of public space, recreation, restaurants, and shopping. And when it opens, it will be Inter Miami's home for a very long time, having already inked a deal with the city of Miami for a 99-year lease. Tracing their roots to the original USL side, Nashville SC, the original stadium for that USL team was originally called First Tennessee Park, and it was built to be the home of the minor league baseball team, the Nashville Sounds. The stadium opened in 2015 and the naming rights were sold to First Tennessee Bank. In 2019, following the merger, the parent company First Horizon unified all of its subsidiaries under the First Horizon brand, and the stadium was renamed to First Horizon Park. The Nashville Sounds currently play there as a member of the International League and are the AAA affiliate of the Milwaukee Brewers. Nashville SC played there the 2 seasons they were a USL team before being granted expansion into Major League Soccer, when they would move into another stadium. Owned and operated by the city and county since it opened in 1999, the next home for Nashville SC as they joined Major League Soccer was originally called Adelphia Coliseum, named for Adelphia Communications Corporation. However, that company filed for bankruptcy in 2002, and it led to Adelphia being dropped as the name sponsor, and the stadium was simply called the Coliseum. Louisiana Pacific, a materials manufacturer, then acquired the naming rights in 2006, renaming the stadium to LP Field. And then in 2015, the stadium was renamed once again, and the rights were sold to Japanese automaker Nissan. Nissan Stadium was home to Nashville SC for their first 2 MLS seasons in 2020 and 2021. And the stadium is the permanent home of the Tennessee Titans since it opened in 1999. And it has been the home of the Tennessee State Tigers of college football since 1999 as well. In 2022, the new home of Nashville SC was opened, and it is the largest soccer-specific stadium in the United States, with a capacity of 30,000 fans. The naming rights were sold to Geodis, a French logistics company, giving us Geodis Park. Austin FC played their first 8 MLS matches away while their stadium was being completed. Austin FC's home opened for their inaugural season midway through 2021, and it was named Q2 Stadium. The naming rights were sold to a local digital banking company called Q2 Holdings. And amazingly, Austin FC's section in this video is really that simple. Funding secured, the stadium built just in time for the team to have played every home game at their own stadium. Charlotte FC joined MLS in 2022 and is owned by the same owner as the Carolina Panthers. Naturally, this meant that the cleanest solution to begin their MLS franchise was to share facilities with the Carolina Panthers NFL team. The Panthers Stadium was built in 1996 and was built for them as an expansion team in the NFL. The original name was Ericsson Stadium, rights sold to the Swedish telecommunications company Ericsson. In 2004, the naming rights were sold again to Bank of America, the second largest bank in the world, which also happens to be headquartered in Charlotte. And Bank of America Stadium continues to be the home of both Charlotte-based teams, with Charlotte FC joining MLS in 2022. Opening in 2023 for St. Louis City's initial season in Major League Soccer, Energizer Park was planned from the beginning as St. Louis City SC's home. Originally, the naming rights were sold in 2022 to Centene Corporation, I think I'm pronouncing that right, a St. Louis-based healthcare company, and the plan was to name the stadium Centene Stadium. However, after that deal fell through, the stadium was renamed City Park after the club. It was then announced that a naming rights deal had been struck to begin in 2025 with the battery manufacturer Energizer, giving us Energizer Park. The company is headquartered in St. Louis County. And along with being the home of St. Louis City SC, since opening in 2023, it has also been the home of St. Louis City SC2, their MLS Next Pro team. And finally, to the newest addition. Joining Major League Soccer in 2025, San Diego FC will play its games at Snapdragon Stadium. Built in 2022 by San Diego State University, Snapdragon Stadium's naming rights were sold to San Diego-based chip manufacturer Qualcomm, whose Snapdragon line of SoCs are often found in computers, tablets, and cell phones. Previously, Qualcomm Stadium and Snapdragon Stadium had been names used of San Diego State's previous home stadium, which was also home to the San Diego Chargers at the time, the Padres at one point, and even the San Diego Sockers of the OG NASL. The primary home of the San Diego State Aztecs of college football, they were joined in 2022 by San Diego Wave FC, who have played their home games in Snapdragon Stadium since joining the NWSL. And in 2025, San Diego FC will also call Snapdragon Stadium home. And that does it for this video about Major League Soccer's stadiums. I hope you enjoyed learning the history of some of your favorite teams, and I can't wait to do this with every other league. If you have any ideas or feedback, feel free to throw them in the comments below. I'll try to respond if I can. And if you liked this video, be sure to like and subscribe and tell somebody you know about it. It's one of the best parts about sports, is sharing it with others. But until next time, I hope you enjoyed learning something new, and I'll see you on the next video.